All right. So Diddy's trial has begun. Cassie Ventura, his former paramour and protege, has been testifying to absolutely horrific acts that were committed against her, allegedly, including the fact that Diddy took videos of the freak offs. And she actually claims that he threatened her as she was trying to get away from him, threatened to release these videos. Now, there's a lot of speculation that Diddy was kind of another Epstein, that he was working for certain interests, and part of his job within that network was to accumulate blackmail material. And we do know that he videoed these freak offs, and we know with a fair amount of certainty that a lot of people attended these parties who would be very embarrassed to have those videos released. So it doesn't look good for Diddy in this trial. You have some male escorts that he allegedly hired testifying to having been there and seen the abuse, physical abuse against Ventura. Of course, there's that hotel video, indisputable, of Diddy attacking her. But now Chris Cuomo, who is really tight with friend of show Suge Knight, which means we're like 1 degree of separation from Chris Cuomo.
Yeah.
Uh, Suge Knight does not seem to think things look as dire for Diddy as they might appear.
Like I think he got some favors with the government. I think they're gonna show him a little leeway. It might not seem like it when it's all said and done, but I don't think he has nothing to worry about. I don't think he's worried because he's gonna be federal, and if he get convicted, Trump's gonna pardon him. So what's the worry?
You think the President of the United States would pardon Sean Combs for sex trafficking?
Shit, he pardoned Michael Harris, who allegedly killed a Jewish teenager or had him killed. So they don't care about that. It's all about, what's in it for the long run and what the bucks say and what the power of the people want.
Suge, I got to tell you,
Trump's not scared.
I can't argue with your eyes on the situation because you lived it and you understand the dynamics. And I appreciate you going through all the hoops to call us and weigh in on this.
Okay. All right. So why would Suge Knight believe that? Well, Whitney Webb is doing a 3-part series about Diddy's relationship to a lot of the same kinds of interests that she's discussed in regards to Epstein, but focus particularly on how those interests have infiltrated the hip hop industry, going back to old school mobsters like the Genovese crime family, the Gambinos. So this is just a little bit of her reporting. One label under blackmail, the early intersections of Diddy and the Epstein network. In part one of this series on the overlap between the worlds of Sean Diddy Combs and Jeffrey Epstein, we examine Combs's early years, his mentors, and the industry figures who ensured their, as well as Combs's own, commercial success. Ties to organized crime and intelligence are readily apparent and point toward a truly sinister reason behind this network's patronage of Combs and his close associates like Andre Harrell and Russell Simmons. So a little bit in the article. It should come as no surprise upon closer examination of Sean Combs that, like Epstein, he was operating on behalf of a larger network that he did not ultimately control. Instead, it arguably controlled him. Combs was acting on behalf of an oligarch network that directly overlaps with that of Epstein. However, Combs was used to influence a different industry and a different community for the benefit of these intelligence and organized crime connected oligarchs. Also explored in this piece are the corporations behind the success of Combs's mentors and later Combs himself, namely the Music Corporation of America, MCA, and Arista Records. When taken together with other claims from the period, namely about efforts to manipulate hip hop for the benefit of the private prison industry in the early to mid 1990s, It appears that this network's interest in Combs, as well as his mentors, was part of something much larger that sought to target not just the hip hop industry itself, but the African American community at large. Now, I assume what she's touching on there, she hasn't completed the series, obviously. She's only released part one so far, is a lot of observers and researchers have said that the way hip hop turned towards promotion of kind of a gangsterism and a materialism was intentional to undermine the Black community, to promote violence and internecine fighting so that they couldn't unify. And she's also positing that it was partly for the profit of the private prison industry. So it'll be interesting to see where her series goes in that regard. But Combs's father was a gangster who did heroin business, was an associate of Frank Lucas, the famous figure portrayed by Denzel Washington, an American gangster. Um, and he was probably rubbed out by the Genovese, who suspected he was going to cooperate with the feds. He was doing heroin business with them. So Combs was born and bred into that world. Now, part of what's so unique and frankly dangerous about Whitney Webb's reporting is she gets into when you read these books about the mob, which I've read quite a lot of, they don't really get into that. Like once in a while, they'll get into some stuff about Trafficante and JFK here and there. It's well known that the mob was asked to protect the ports during World War II. But what Whitney gets into is essentially that the intelligence services and the mob have been working together since World War II. That's portrays the initial contact usually, and that a lot of modern corporations evolve from those gangsters going legit, so-called legit, so that they never really stopped using gangster tactics, which could be, we've speculated a lot. Why is Israel the absolute third rail? Is there really no one with integrity? Well, man, I mean, if you're really dealing with mobsters and gangsters, what happens to you if you really defy them? It seems like that might be the thing that keeps all of these people in line ultimately. If the blackmail doesn't work, you can always have a convenient accident. So Whitney went on Katie Halper's show and she talked a little bit about this.
The media narrative is about these cases is sort of, very focused on either Diddy or Epstein, and like they were the mastermind of all of this stuff. And these people never exist in a vacuum. They tend to have significant moneyed benefactors that somehow evade persecution or even investigation. That's very obvious in the Epstein case, but I think it's also pretty true as it relates to, the Diddy case as well. And, he learned this behavior that he's now, in prison for and awaiting trial for from, various other figures that have somehow evaded the kind of charges that now face Diddy. And why is that? So the series is meant to sort of explore that, and also, how this broader, I guess, oligarch network that also has a lot of ties to the Epstein situation sort of pop up in the record industry with direct connections to Bad Boy Records and Bad Boy Entertainment, and some of these other business ventures of Sean Combs. So Clive Davis in particular is the person that is really credited with allowing Bad Boy Records to be a success, because, they really wanted to have been successful if they didn't enter into that very early distribution and promo deal with Clive Davis's Arista Records, when they were created. And this is also true of, his mentor, Andre Harrell at Uptown Records. Uptown Records wanted to have been successful if it wasn't for their distribution deal with MCA, for example, which is now Universal Studios. I think the same is true for Russell Simmons' label Def Jam, but I think in their case it was CBS Records, which is also related to sort of the Clive Davis story. And so, there's basically been this sort of this unorganized crime effort to dominate those particular labels for some time. And Davis stands accused of people that were once close to, Combs and later became rivals. like Suge Knight and also his former bodyguard Gene Deal, of sort of training Diddy in this using drugs and sex to control people.
Right.
And also allegedly Russell Simmons of Def Jam engaged in that same type of behavior and sort of mentored Diddy in that, because Russell Simmons was obviously important, not just for Diddy, but also for Andre Harrell at Uptown Records. And that's how, Diddy, Sean Combs, first entered the music industry.
Okay. All right. So it's pretty well known that in the early days of the music industry, the mob was very involved in nightclubs and the early record companies, and a lot of that early doo-wop was produced by them. The Frank Sinatra association with the mob has been pretty well known and pretty well explored. Some of this started with actually a Jewish gangster, Arnold Rothstein, the guy who fixed the 1919 World Series. He was one of the earliest mobsters to see the potential in entertainment, because it's mostly a cash business. So it's a very good opportunity to launder money. Who knows how many tickets you sold to the show, right? It just, it was a very good way to move money. So he was actually a big, what they call a Broadway angel, a big Broadway investor, but it was really money laundering for him. So he kind of led the way. That plus prohibition brought them into the nightclub business, which dovetails to the music industry. So it's pretty well known that in early record company history, very often the mob would have a piece of these record companies that were selling doo-wop and rock and roll music, that kind of thing. The fact that that never stopped is something that is really not explored, but makes a lot of sense. Now, if you look at a common denominator with Epstein, and particularly with Diddy, this is the second time this book is coming up this week. The idea of using sex and drugs as a means of control is essentially what Tom O'Neill theorizes in his book Chaos. That's exactly what the book is about. The theory, and Tom is responsible about not getting out over his skis and saying conclusively this is definitely what happened, but his reporting very strongly suggests that Charles Manson was part of an experiment of using drugs and sex as a means of brainwashing and control during his years in San Francisco, and through the infamous San Francisco Free Clinic. It makes a lot of sense when you look at Charles Manson's background. He was just a loser. He was a 3-time loser. He was a convict. Like, he had never been a leader. He had never been somebody who was known for really running gangs or anything. He was a little pipsqueak in prison. So how did a guy like this with no real education develop this concept of in very sophisticated ways using drugs and sex to manipulate and control people like that? So the suggestion in Chaos, very strong suggestion, is that he learned that from operatives who were using him in an experimental effort to develop those techniques. Okay, so now what? This is 50 years ago now. So how far advanced would they be in those techniques since then? It's very interesting that what Tom O'Neill found in his research for Chaos dovetails so much to what Whitney finds with Jeffrey Epstein and with Diddy, that they're operatives for gangsters and intelligence networks who are using sex and drugs as a means of control and blackmail.
Yeah, and that's what makes these stories interesting to me. I mean, even though I'm like I would say an amateur conspiracy theorist, recreational conspiracy theorist, I would say. The Epstein thing never interested me that much until I got into her angle on it, because now this is more a political issue than what originally meets the eye, right? And then you have to ask yourself, same thing here, obviously. Okay, well, how do these guys go on so long? There's that scene in the Departed where Matt Damon finds out that the Jack Nicholson character has been basically a rat for the FBI. He's been an informant. and Nicholson says something like, "Grow up. How do you think I made it this far? How do you think I went all this way doing all this stuff without getting put in jail for life? Like, of course I am. Grow up. It's obvious, right?" And that's kind of, yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the similar thing here. Like, yeah, how do you think this goes on for as long as it does?
Right. Right.
Before somebody blows a whistle on it and someone gets arrested for it. How do you think it involves this many people? You know, as to have, you know, like the number of people who would go to these freak off parties. How does
Right.
this stuff, how is this allowed to keep going on unless it serves a purpose? It serves a purpose for the government. And yeah, what the book gets into is just that it's standard operating procedure for the government to just coordinate with gangsters, with drug
Right.
runners, with murderers. Like, they don't think anything of it. So, of course, if guys like Diddy are able to get away with this stuff for so long, it's because it's being supervised to some extent and being allowed to an even greater extent that it's being supervised. I mean, it's the only real explanation for it. And that explains Epstein as well, right? I mean, it's the same thing. Like, this stuff doesn't go on at the scale it goes on
Right.
with no eyes on it. So then you have to ask, okay, if there are eyes on it, well, why isn't it stopping? That's the big question. That's the big question. And there's a multi-pronged answer to that question, obviously, which is what Whitney digs into so well. But yeah, I mean, when you think about it, of course, it's as obvious as, you know, it should have been to Matt Damon in the movie. Oh, grow up. Of course. Well, how you think I'm out? How you think I'm still out here? Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and the music industry, the film industry are such fertile grounds for finding compliant people that you can draw into this kind of activity, because the people in those industries are usually damaged and desperate,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
You know, well, this is the price. This is the price. You want to be a big star? This is the price. How many are going to say, you know what, I'm going to go back home and work in a craft store?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And the lifestyle and the
Right.
decadence, the hedonism, that's how you get sucked in. And once you're in, you're in. Just
Yeah.
like the mob. Once you're in, you're
Right.
in. Once you agree to do them that first favor, you're going to do them favors until they decide you're not worth it to them anymore. Right?
Yep.
Like, once they get you, you're hooked.
Please clap.